to everybody, or good very early morning to many of you who are still on European or North American time. My name is Daniel Gerson. I run the program of work at the OECD on public employment and management, and I also manage the network of schools of government, which is meeting here in parallel to this meeting. So a special hello to all of you. I haven't had a great opportunity to chat with each of you yet, but we're just beginning here. So I look forward to today's and tomorrow's conversations, and of course a huge thank you to NHI for hosting this meeting and for organizing this conference and inviting us to contribute. So, what am I going to talk about today? Well, I'd like to share with you a very new publication that we've just launched very recently. It's our Government at a Glance, Southeast Asia. Given that we're in Asia and that we have many Southeast Asian countries with us, I figured it would be a great opportunity to share some of the results of this work and to try to use it to spark conversation and reflection and raise a bunch of questions around the theme that we're here to talk about today, being HRM for enhancing and collaborative governance. So the numbers and the comparative indicators in this report are many, and they're not really all directly related to collaborative governance, but of course I'm going to do my best to try and bring them into that storyline and see how we can use them to develop a little bit of deeper thinking around some of these questions. So first off, our Government at a Glance reviews. We do a Government at a Glance publication every 2 years. In fact, the next main Government at a Glance publication will be launched in about 2 weeks' time. And that 2019 edition will have a whole range of indicators from every area of governance that we work on, including HRM, by the way. And we also do regional specific Government at a Glances, where we work with countries in a particular region on a smaller number of themes. And the idea is to try and use our survey instruments to bring in a bunch of different indicators that we can then use to compare those countries in that region with countries in the OECD and beyond. I should say that this project also was a close collaboration with the Asia Development Bank, and we are incredibly happy as well for the support of the OECD Korea Policy Center and the Korean government, which really provided a platform in many ways to help us engage with these countries and collect and clean the data as it came in. So in the Southeast Asian edition, we try to use these indicators to develop evidence on how governments work, kind of inside the black box. We use this evidence to help countries understand and benchmark their own processes and performance, compare themselves to each other and to OECD countries in the region and beyond. And so most of the indicators include data for the 10 ASEAN countries, as well as Korea and Japan being the 2 Asian OECD members, and as well as New Zealand and Australia, given their geographical proximity. We try to develop these indicators to create actionable insights, so things that can actually be understood and that help to assess and improve the way countries operate. And in fact, in Southeast Asia, there was really nothing. This is beginning to develop a much wider set of governance-related indicators to help ASEAN countries meet their own stated goal of building and sustaining a high-performing, dynamic, and citizen-centric civil service. And so the main theme of these indicators is around citizen centricity. Now, what do they tell us a little bit about the context of the region? Well, I've just picked a couple very light slides here, given that I'd really like to skip forward and focus on the HR dimensions. But first off, what we can say is that Southeast Asian governments are relatively small. Certainly, they spend less than OECD countries as a percentage of their GDP, and they also employ fewer people as a percentage of total employment. Now, if we take these together, though, interestingly, when we look at the cost of that public employment. They're actually higher than the average OECD. And so they hire fewer people, yet they spend more on the compensation of their employees as a percentage of their total government expenditures. And so this tells us that they're actually investing a significant amount of their budgets in public employment, as do OECD countries. About 10% of, on average, of GDP in OECD countries is spent on the compensation of public employees, which makes us really think that we need to be very careful in how we manage this investment. And one of the things that I do is really try to help governments rethink the way they manage this significant investment in public employment to get more value, more productivity out of it. So the focus, as I said, is on citizen centricity. And I think actually this is a very close focus to what we're discussing today because, if you will, citizen centricity also depends on collaborative governance, as certainly in an era of hyper-connectivity. If we begin thinking about what does the citizen want, what does the citizen need, and we work backwards from there, then we start taking all these different elements of what we provide and we can think of them in a very different framework. Rather than thinking of them in silos, we think of them as joined up pieces that all contribute to a particular objective of improving particular lives of particular people. The way the report focuses on these, we talk about services organized around citizens' needs. We talk about the need for openness, engagement, transparency, and accountability and governance and how that contributes to more citizen-centric services and, of course, to more collaborative governance. And then we talk about the need to bring this together through a professional, responsive civil service that can deliver and innovate to meet changing needs. I'll give you a few indicators on the first two, but then I'm going to spend a bit more time on the last one, given that we're here to talk about HRM today. So one interesting reflection is that, in fact, when we look at indicators of satisfaction with public services, Southeast Asia does very well, according to Gallup studies. In fact, better generally than the OECD averages. But when we think about integrated service delivery, we have a few indicators that perhaps give us some indication of those in the Southeast Asian region. For example, integrated national portals. Most Southeast Asian countries have one, which could combine, for example, data, information, systems, processes, and services. And this shows sort of an approach to providing integrated services externally. But of course, the real value in integrated service delivery is also trying to integrate the internal aspects of governance and delivery. So, for example, we have data on the use of EIDs, which can enable higher internal integration and improve access to services, especially when integrated with the online portals. So we also see that 3/4 of Southeast Asian countries have EIDs, but yet very few of them really integrate these seamlessly with the external portals. And this is just one example of where we see some of this integrated service delivery perspectives. When we think about public sector openness, engagement, transparency, and accountability, we have various different indicators. For example, we look at the use of citizens' budgets, which show budget information in plain language, and this can help citizens to understand budgeting and improve connectivity across sectors. And we see that most Southeast Asian countries, again, they do this. However, other aspects of budget are generally less transparent in Southeast Asian countries, such as long-term expenditures and revenue perspectives. Apparently, only one Southeast Asian country makes that transparent on a regular basis. Another important ingredient, or a main important ingredient to collaborative governance is, of course, data and information. And I think the previous presenter talked about platforms and the use of open government data. So this is an indicator that's been developed by our digital government team that looks at 3 different aspects of open government data, and it looks at the proactive publication of open government data that can be shared, analyzed, and reused on a large scale. Of course, keeping in mind the needs for personal privacy and data protection. And as you can see, there is some room to grow in most Southeast Asian countries to catch up with leaders such as Korea, who actually leads the field not only in Asia, but across most OECD countries in the provision of this kind of data. And I think this is a key indicator of the opportunities, at least, for collective, collaborative governance. So if we take these as some indicators, what does this mean now for human resource management and the development of a professional, strategic, and innovative civil service? I come back to the presentations this morning, Michael's presentation, for example, which really emphasized that it's great to have all of these policies, tools, and strategies in place. You can have the open government frameworks. You can have the open data. You can have the portals and platforms. But often we do have them, and we can check the box and we get a good score on nice charts like these. But actually making use of them, actually using them to genuinely produce better outputs, better outcomes, better impact, that is a much more difficult challenge, and one that rests in the hands of a professional, strategic, and innovative civil service. So what does that mean in the case of collaborative governance? Well, there's no clear recipe, of course, for how to do HR for collaboration. But there's a starting point that I love to use when I try to think through these questions. And this is a nice model for all of you, perhaps, to think about, because it's very simple and it just has 3 ingredients to success. This is like any success. You can do anything in the world that you want if you have these 3 simple things. Of course, they're not very simple. But the first one is ability. You need to be able to do it. So you need skills, you need knowledge, you need competencies. Okay, great. So we can train people, we can hire people, right? Now what? Well, we need to motivate people. If you want to do something hard, you've really got to want to do it. So you need to have a motivation, intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, the right combination, the right different incentives around those skills. Because if you don't have that, then those skills may not actually get used. But that's not enough either, because you need to have the right opportunity. And opportunities can take us into a whole range of space. We can talk about how we design the work to get people to make sure that they have the right opportunities to put those skills and motivations to use. We can think about the leadership. We can think about the political environment, right? So these 3 elements need to align to make success happen. And that ultimately is perhaps the role of human resource management, is to think about what is the goal, and then how can we align these 3 different elements through our policies and programs and structures to actually achieve that goal. So if it's collaborative governance, then let's figure out what the abilities are to collaborate, and how can we make sure that we're hiring people who have those abilities and training them the right way. How do we figure out how to motivate people to collaborate? And then also, how do we make sure that we're actually providing them the right opportunities to do so? Well, coming back to our Government at a Glance publication, there's a couple little tidbits of insight into each of these areas. So when we look at recruitment systems, for example, we can see that in most Southeast Asian countries, they tend to lean towards a model of career-based civil services, where people get hired early in their career and they work their way through the organization till they get to the top or to a certain point. And this is contrasted with the position-based system, where people tend to be hired in from the outside for specific positions within the organization. When you have a career-based system, you tend to have a stronger separation between the private sector and the public sector, and there is perhaps less opportunity to bring in new skills and create more permeability, which could, in theory, lead to more collaboration. However, you might have the opportunities to be able to generate more collaboration within the public sector by creating more interaction inside and managing people's careers in such a way that they move through different organizations. And so there are trade-offs to both, and neither is the case for success. Both have to be managed carefully. And in this case, perhaps it's a focus on internal mobility. And if we also think about training in Southeast Asian countries, again, this tracks along with the idea of having a career civil service, is that there tends to be a larger focus on government-wide strategies and coordination across different training institutions. And this is a huge opportunity, in fact, to be able to generate the kind of culture required for collaboration, because bringing people together from different ministries, different agencies, different functions through training and development across a whole organization can create the kinds of abilities needed. If we move to motivation, well, we have an indicator on performance assessments, and in fact, Southeast Asian countries are using performance assessments in their HR systems heavily, even more than OECD countries. And this means that there is a particular incentive system that exists that could be perhaps aligned to encouraging collaboration. Can we actually use collaboration as a performance indicator? Can people be assessed on how collaborative they have been or how successful they have been at driving collaborative initiatives and participating in them? It's not enough, but if you have a strong performance assessment system that doesn't measure collaboration, then it won't happen, because these kinds of systems, when they're strong, they tend to really structure the behaviors and the activities that we can expect. Now, we also have an indicator on performance-related pay, and I'll echo something that Professor Buchert said earlier, that we don't have a high degree of confidence in the effectiveness of performance-related pay. But in fact, what we do know is that it tends to narrow people's focus and really get people focused on the few things that they know they're going to be measured on. And that means that if it's not collaboration, it won't be collaboration. And so there is a risk in this kind of sort of mechanized performance environment that it might actually work against a more collaborative goals that the government may set. So how do we rethink incentive mechanisms that provide the right kind of incentives to truly engage in collaborative governance? Thinking about opportunity, this slide, this indicator actually shows the level of delegation of human resource management. And what we see here is that in most Southeast Asian countries, human resource management is highly centralized. It's really done centrally, and perhaps that is a recognition of smaller governments. And I think this is a double-edged sword, or we could look at this as trade-offs again. When you centralize things, you have a better bird's eye view. You can perhaps manage people's careers in more collaborative ways. You can bring people together from different areas of the government to do collaborative projects, and you can make sure that all of the HR structures are aligned so that it's easier to do that. But if things are too centralized, too standardized, then we lose the ability to allow the kind of autonomy needed to truly engage in collaboration and collaborative governance. We talked earlier also about accountability and responsibility and the need to be able to align these elements at the level that is required. A truly collaborative governance in a hyper-connected world is going to need to be relatively decentralized, with the right tools in the right hands at the lowest levels to be able to generate the kind of interactions and collaborations needed. And those will be different in different areas, in different parts of the country, in different cities, in different sectors, and in different functions. And that's going to require probably more delegation and less standardization, at least in a controlling sense. So how do we balance, in a sense, the opportunities presented by having a nice centralized perspective on HRM and the need to be able to delegate autonomy and authority? Well, maybe through leadership. And this is an area that we can end on a very optimistic note. We see that Southeast Asian countries are taking big steps to manage their senior civil servants, their senior executive servants, in separate ways, in ways that group them together as a leadership cohort. And this provides a lot of opportunity to really rethink how collaboration works. Because if you want a more collaborative governance, it's going to start from the top. And even though the collaboration has to happen in lower levels, it won't unless it begins at the top. So having a separate group who already can begin collaborating at the highest levels creates a very important signal and opportunity to spread that throughout organizations. And we can see here that Southeast Asian countries seem to be well placed to take advantage of that kind of opportunity. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm using these indicators not to try and show who is better, who is worse at any one area, but rather to try and raise reflections on different models, different structures, different institutional frameworks, and how that can get us to think about the different kinds of HR needed in for collaborative governance in a hyper-connected society. Thinking about the abilities, can collaboration be a competency? Can it be included in the way that we hire people and the way that we train people? Motivation, how do we rethink the incentives to make sure that people have the right risks and rewards for collaboration? But really, how do we then make sure that we provide them the opportunities to put those abilities and motivations into practice? And what does collaborative leadership look like in that context? These are not questions that have been answered by any of our even most forward-looking administrations. These are questions that are constantly being discussed and negotiated. And in fact, they're part of what we're trying to come to with our recommendation on public service leadership and capability, which was actually the most recently adopted recommendation in the Governance Directorate. January 2019, we finally agreed on 14 principles across the OECD countries that now we can say these define a civil service, a workforce that is fit for purpose to achieve the highly complex tasks and challenges. And of course, this is just a one slide. There's more details on all of these, and I very much encourage you to download the full text of the recommendation and to work with us to try and figure out how we take these principles and now actually turn them into actionable tools that our member countries and non-member countries across the world can use to generate a fit-for-purpose civil service that is ready for collaborative governance in a hyper-connected age. Thank you.